Welcome to Night Creepypasta Rules. Tonight, we step inside a place most people would avoid even in daylight. A drugstore buried deep in Perdition, Wyoming. A town with a name like a death sentence. And a night shift that's nothing short of a curse. Dr. Julian Frost was just looking for escape. But what he found at Willow Creek Pharmacy were 3 rules that kept the walls from weeping, the dead from whispering, and the past from clawing its way back into the world. Break them, and something breaks you. This isn't just another scary story. This is one of the best I've brought you. Atmospheric, chilling, and with a twist at the end that will rewire the way you think about ghost stories forever. So, turn off the lights, settle in, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment if you've ever felt like a place was watching you. And stay to the very end. Trust me, the final dose hits hardest. Let's begin. The only sound worse than the silence of Perdition, Wyoming, was the whisper that sometimes rode in on it. A dry, rustling sound, like old paper charts describing unspeakable treatments. It seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the town. A place whose name felt less like a geographical marker, and more like a final, chilling prognosis. My arrival at Willow Creek Pharmacy, as the last rays of a bruised sunset bled behind the jagged peaks of the distant mountains, did little to dispel this notion. The building itself was a 2-story Victorian relic, its upper windows dark and vacant like empty eye sockets. The ground floor pharmacy exuding an air of ancient, melancholic waiting. My name is Dr. Julian Frost. Once, that title had been a source of pride. A testament to years spent mastering the intricate dance of molecules and compounds. A passion for an elegant formula. Now, it felt like an epitaph, a catastrophic error in a proprietary compound I'd been developing. A miscalculation in a decimal point, a moment of hubris, had led to consequences. Faces contorted in pain or blank with an unnatural stillness flickered behind my eyelids whenever I closed them. The ensuing scandal had shattered my career, leaving me adrift, seeking not redemption but oblivion. Perdition, with its promise of anonymity, and the graveyard shift, seemed to offer just that. Miss Lydia Thorne, the proprietor and sole pharmacist apart from myself, was as much a fixture of Willow Creek Pharmacy as the age-darkened wooden cabinets and the faint, pervasive scent of dried herbs and chemical astringents. She was tall, remarkably upright for her advanced years, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun that allowed no stray strands. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a disconcerting stillness, as if they had witnessed centuries pass and found little to surprise them. Dr. Frost, she greeted me, her voice devoid of inflection, emerging from the shadowed depths of the dispensary. You are punctual. Punctuality is appreciated here. She didn't offer a hand, merely inclined her head, a gesture that felt more like an assessment than a welcome. The tour was brief, efficient. The pharmacy was larger than it appeared from outside. A labyrinth of shelves groaning under the weight of amber glass bottles, porcelain jars, and modern blister packs. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the floorboards, like distant, sleeping machinery. Your shift is from 9 in the evening until 7 in the morning, Miss Thorne stated, her gaze sweeping over me. Chloe Davies, our intern, will be here for the first hour to assist with the transition and closing duties. After that, you are the sole custodian of Willow Creek's nocturnal needs. As if on cue, Chloe emerged from the compounding room. A young woman in her early 20s, her bright, intelligent eyes, a stark contrast to Miss Thorne's glacial composure. She offered a nervous but friendly smile. Dr. Frost? Hi, I'm Chloe. Welcome to, well, Perdition. There was a slight hesitation in her voice as she said the town's name, while Chloe showed me the inventory system and the peculiarities of the ancient cash register. Miss Thorne waited, a silent, patient sentinel. When Chloe finally gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. "It gets pretty quiet here at night, Dr. Frost," she said, her gaze flicking towards the darkened windows of the upper floor. "Sometimes you hear things. The wind, mostly. People say they sometimes see lights up at the old Blackwood Asylum ruins on the ridge. Just stories, I guess." She hurried out, as if eager to escape the pharmacy's oppressive atmosphere before true nightfall. Once Chloe was gone, Miss Thorne's demeanor, if possible, grew even more somber. She gestured for me to follow her to the main dispensing counter. "There are protocols, Dr. Frost," she said, her voice a low murmur that the antique walls seemed to absorb. "Not written in any manual, not discussed with the daylight staff. They are for the night, and for the one who watches over it. They are for your continued well-being." I felt a familiar chill, the kind that had often preceded the discovery of something deeply unsettling in my former life. "First," she began, her eyes fixing on mine, "should a prescription arrive, be it by fax, electronically, or hand-delivered by means unseen, bearing the patient name John Doe or Jane Doe, and listing the address as the Blackwood Creek Asylum, or any variation thereof, you are to shred it immediately. Do not log it. Do not question it. Consign it to oblivion. The Blackwood Creek Asylum." Chloe had just mentioned its ruins. "Why?" I asked, the pharmacist in me already bristling at the idea of destroying a prescription, however unorthodox. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Miss Thorne's face. "Some ailments, Dr. Frost, are not of the body, and some patients are best left undisturbed in their eternal rest. Their requests are not for succor. Second," she continued, ignoring my unspoken protest, "you are not to fill any order, telephoned or otherwise, for unusually large quantities of sedatives, particularly chlorpromazine, haloperidol, or physical restraints, after 2 o'clock in the morning, regardless of the apparent urgency or the claimed authority of the prescriber. Politely defer. Cite stock shortages. The hour of 2 is a threshold." This was more than just strange. It bordered on professional misconduct. Yet, the certainty in her voice, the absolute conviction in those cold gray eyes, held me silent. And third, her voice dropped further, the hum of the pharmacy seeming to deepen around us. "If, in the returns bin, or inexplicably appearing on these counters, you find a vial, often small, often ancient in appearance, perfectly preserved, containing a substance you do not recognize and which bears no label, you are not to open it. Under any circumstances, you will secure it, preferably in the old lead-lined safe in the compounding room, and inform me at once in the morning. Do not attempt to analyze it. Do not even inhale too deeply near it." The air in the pharmacy suddenly felt heavy, the scent of old herbs and chemicals sharpening, mingled with a faint, almost undetectable sweetness, like cloying funereal flowers. "Nance Thorne," I finally managed, "with all due respect, these protocols, they seem to defy every standard of pharmaceutical practice. What exactly am I supposed to be guarding against here?" She turned her gaze towards the front windows, where the last vestiges of twilight were surrendering to the encroaching dark. The street outside was deserted, the storefronts opposite like shuttered eyes. "Some fond coup, Dr. Frost," she said, her voice a silken whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "Ere not to cure, but to contain. To keep old wounds from weeping anew. Perdition has many old wounds." She placed a heavy, ornate brass key on the counter. "The pharmacy is yours until dawn. May your shift be uneventful." With that, she retreated through a narrow door behind the dispensary, a door I hadn't noticed before, which presumably led to her private quarters or an exit. The click of its lock was unnervingly final. I was alone. The silence of perdition, broken only by the hum and the rustle of imagined paper, settled around me like a shroud, and from somewhere deep within the ancient walls, or perhaps only within my own strained mind, I thought I heard the faintest drawn-out sigh. The first few hours of my inaugural night shift at Willow Creek Pharmacy passed with an unnerving tranquility. I familiarized myself with the archaic inventory system, the meticulously organized, if unsettlingly silent, compounding room, and the lingering scent of something I couldn't quite place. A sweet, cloying undertone beneath the sharper medicinal smells, like lilies left too long in a sick room. The silence, after the initial departure of Miss Thorne, was profound, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the shadowed front retail area and the occasional creak of the old building settling around me. It was a silence that amplified every stray thought, every half-forgotten image from my past. The faces of those I'd failed, or believed I'd failed, seemed to shimmer at the edge of my vision. I tried to dismiss Miss Thorne's rules as the eccentricities of an old woman in an isolated town, perhaps a way to haze the new night pharmacist. But the chilling conviction in her voice, the dead seriousness in her eyes, made that dismissal difficult. The Blackwood Creek Asylum, even the name sent a shiver down my spine. It was just past midnight when the ancient fax machine in the corner, a relic I was surprised was still operational, whirred to life with a series of jarring beeps and clicks. It spat out a single, slightly crumpled sheet of paper. I picked it up. The letterhead was smudged, unreadable, but the prescription itself was clear enough, written in an elegant, old-fashioned script. Patient name, John Doe. Address, 1 Blackwood Creek Asylum Road, Perdition. Medication, tincture of opium, QS, Trin for existential dread. My breath caught, shredded immediately. Ms. Thorne's words. Existential dread. Tincture of opium. This was beyond irregular. It was a ghost script from a bygone era. My professional instincts warred with the unease coiling in my gut. I hesitated, my fingers tracing the faded ink. As I did, a gust of frigid air, impossibly cold for an autumn night with sealed windows, swept through the dispensary, ruffling the papers on my desk. The lights flickered once, twice, and I heard it. A soft, drawn-out sigh, seeming to emanate from the very walls around me. It was followed by a faint, almost inaudible whisper that sounded like, "So, cold." My hand shot out, snatching the prescription. I practically ran to the heavy-duty shredder Miss Thorne had pointed out. As the machine devoured the paper, reducing it to meaningless strips, the sighing seemed to intensify for a moment, then faded, leaving an oppressive stillness in its wake. I stood there, heart pounding, the scent of those funereal lilies suddenly stronger. The next afternoon, Chloe arrived for her short overlap shift, looking unusually pale. "Rough night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just didn't sleep well," she said, avoiding my gaze. She began restocking a shelf with vitamins, her movements jerky. "You know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "my grandmother used to work at Blackwood, before it closed, as a cleaner," she said. She said the doctors there, they weren't always trying to cure people. Sometimes they were just listening to things the patients said they heard, things the walls whispered. She shuddered. She never liked this pharmacy, said it felt too much like the quiet rooms at Blackwood. Later, Deputy Ray Keller made his first nocturnal visit. He was a man of few words, his face deeply lined, his eyes holding a permanent weariness. He bought a bottle of aspirin and a lukewarm coffee from the self-serve machine. He didn't engage in small talk, but his gaze swept the pharmacy with a slow, methodical intensity, lingering on the shredder. then on the locked door to the compounding room. "Everything quiet tonight, Dr. Frost?" he asked, his voice a low baritone rumble. "Asylum, Deputy," I replied, trying for levity I didn't feel. He just grunted, a non-committal sound. "This town, it has its share of old tombs." He left as silently as he'd arrived. Before I left for my own uneasy sleep, I found a small, leather-bound diary tucked away behind a row of outdated pharmacopoeias. It was a night pharmacist's log, decades old. The entries were sparse, but one, dated shortly before the log abruptly ended, caught my eye. Written in a shaky, spidery hand, it read, "The Doe scripts keep coming. They don't want medication. They want out of the cold. They want out of the cold. I hear them scratching." I closed the diary, the old leather cool beneath my fingers, scratching. The nights at Willow Creek began to take on a rhythm, albeit a deeply unsettling one. The silence remained, but it was no longer empty. It was a listening silence, pregnant with unseen, unheard presences. I started hearing things more distinctly. Soft, dragging footsteps from the floor above. A space Miss Thorne had assured me was empty, used only for storage. The faint clinking of glass, as if someone were idly sorting through old vials in the compounding room. Even when I was at the main counter, I'd call out, a nervous tremor in my voice, only to be met with more silence. The scent of lilies and something else, a faint metallic tang, like old blood or rusting iron, would wax and wane without reason. It was well past 1:30 on a particularly oppressive moonless night when the second rule loomed. The old rotary phone on the counter. A direct line, Miss Thorne said, was for emergencies only, shrilled, its sound anachronistic and jarring. I picked it up. "Willow Creek Pharmacy, Dr. Frost speaking." "Doctor." A voice rasped, thin and strained, like air escaping a punctured lung. "This is Dr. Alistair Finch, Blackwood." "No. I mean, from the county urgent care. We have a situation. Violent, highly agitated. Needs immediate chemical and physical restraint." The voice paused, a wet, gasping sound in the background. "Requesting 100 milligrams Haldol-Im stat and 4 sets of leather limb restraints. Full sets. Urgent." The clock on the wall read 1:52 a.m. Do not fill. After 2 a.m. my mind raced. Urgent care wouldn't typically stock such items in bulk, nor would they call a retail pharmacy for statin orders in such a manner. And Dr. Alistair Finch wasn't a name I recognized from any local physician roster. "Dr. Finch," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll need a formal prescription and patient details for verification." "No time! No time!" the voice shrieked, suddenly losing its strained composure, becoming a high-pitched whine of pure panic. He's breaking free. You must help us. Send the restraints, the medicine, before they get out." Then, abruptly, the panic subsided, replaced by a low, seductive whisper. A chorus of voices now, blending into one. "Let us out, Doctor. It's so dark in here, so cold. Just a little something to calm the others." A wave of nausea washed over me. The air in the pharmacy dropped several degrees. I could hear a faint, rhythmic thumping, like a frantic heartbeat, or something heavy being dragged across the stone floor, coming through the earpiece. My hand holding the receiver was slick with sweat. I'm afraid I cannot dispense those quantities without proper authorization and patient verification," I managed, my voice hoarse. "It's after-hours protocol." It was a weak excuse, but the only one I could think of. The whispering stopped. For a beat, there was only the sound of that heavy, rhythmic thumping. Then, A low, guttural chuckle. A sound that seemed to bubble up from a place of profound malignancy. Such a stickler for the rules, Dr. Frost. But the rules, they can be bent or broken. Click. The line went dead. I slammed the receiver down, my body trembling. The lights in the pharmacy flickered, casting dancing, distorted shadows. The thumping sound I'd heard over the phone now seemed to be coming from inside the pharmacy, from the walls themselves. A dull, insistent pulse, and the metallic, bloody scent was overwhelmingly strong, mixed with the sharp, unmistakable odor of formalin. I backed away from the counter, my eyes darting to the locked door of the compounding room, half expecting it to burst open. When Chloe came in later that morning, I was a wreck. I recounted the call, omitting the more overtly supernatural whispers. She listened, her face growing paler with each word. "The old pharmacist," she said, her voice barely a breath. "Mr. Abernathy, the one who they found in the compounding room. He told my aunt, just before it happened, that he kept getting calls like that, late at night, asking for things to keep people quiet, to keep them tied down. He said he started seeing them. Outside, faces in the windows, trying to get in." I spent the rest of that day in a state of heightened anxiety. The walls of Willow Creek Pharmacy no longer felt like a sanctuary, however strange. They felt like a membrane, thin and permeable, separating me from a tide of unseen, unheard horrors. And I had the distinct, chilling impression that something had taken note of my adherence to the rules and was not pleased. That night, I noticed them for the first time. Faint, almost invisible handprints, child-sized, but with fingers too long, too thin, appearing and fading on the cold glass of the front display window, as if small, unseen things were pressing against it from the outside, trying to see in. The presence of the echoes of Blackwood Asylum, as I'd started to call them in the privacy of my own increasingly fractured thoughts, grew more palpable with each passing night. It was no longer just sounds or fleeting smells. I began to see them. Or at least I thought I did. Shifting shadows in my peripheral vision that resolved into gaunt, stooped figures in what looked like tattered institutional gowns, faces pale and drawn, with eyes that were either hollow sockets or burned with a feverish, desperate light, would flash in the reflection of a computer screen or a polished countertop. Gone when I turned to look. Whispers, like dry leaves skittering across a floor, would weave in and out of the building's ambient hum. Sometimes forming my name, sometimes just sighs of pain or soft, incoherent babbling. The scent of lilies, formalin, and that metallic tang became a near constant companion. I was losing sleep, existing on a knife edge of caffeine and frayed nerves. My scientific mind, my pharmacist training, railed against what I was experiencing, searching for logical explanations. Stress, exhaustion, the power of suggestion, but the sheer consistency, the sensory richness of these manifestations was hard to dismiss. It was nearing the end of a particularly harrowing week, a night when the wind outside shrieked like a tormented soul, that the third rule presented itself. I was performing the routine end-of-shift check of the returns bin, a plastic tub where patients occasionally deposited unused or discontinued medications, tucked beneath a half-empty bottle of antacids, and an expired inhaler was something that made me stop cold. It was a small vial, no larger than my thumb, crafted from dark, almost opaque amber glass. It was stoppered with a carved plug of what looked like ebony wood, the top of which was sealed with a disc of blackened beeswax, impressed with a strange, spidery symbol I didn't recognize. The vial itself felt unnaturally cold to the touch, even through my latex glove, and it was remarkably heavy for its size. There was no label, no indication of its contents or origin. It looked ancient, like something unearthed from a forgotten apothecary's chest. Yet it was perfectly preserved, not a chip or scratch on its dark surface. A peculiar aroma emanated from it, Faint but distinct, a complex medley that made my head spin slightly. The sweet, heavy scent of night-blooming jasmine, a sharp, almost acrid note of sulfur, and an underlying metallic tang that reminded me with a jolt of visceral revulsion, of blood. If you find a vial, you are not to open it. Miss Thorne's voice, a cold whisper in my memory, but an almost irresistible compulsion rose within me. My fingers itched to work the ebony stopper free. What secrets did it hold? What forgotten remedy? Or perhaps what exquisitely crafted poison? My scientific curiosity, long suppressed, flared with a dangerous intensity. The vial seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. Or perhaps it was just a trick of the dim pharmacy illumination, and I could swear I heard a soft, feminine hum, a wordless, enchanting melody, coming from within the glass. Discover us. Deputy Keller chose that moment to make one of his infrequent late-night stops. He didn't knock, just let himself in. The bell above the door jangling harshly, startling me. I nearly dropped the vial, burning the midnight oil a bit late. "Dr. Frost?" he asked, his eyes, sharp and assessing, immediately fixing on the vial in my hand. His usual laconic demeanor seemed more strained tonight, his face etched with a deeper weariness. "Just sorting through returns, Deputy," I said, trying to keep my voice even, my hand instinctively closing around the vial, hiding it from view. "Anything unusual turn up?" he pressed, his gaze not leaving my hand. "Sometimes folks around here, they find old things. Things best left buried. Or they try to get rid of things they shouldn't have." "Nothing out of the ordinary," I lied, the vial suddenly feeling like a burning coal in my palm. He grunted, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He bought a pack of antacids. The irony was not lost on me, and left without another word, but his visit had broken the spell. The seductive hum from the vial had ceased. The compulsion to open it lessened, replaced by a gnawing dread. I remembered the old pharmacist's diary. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking. I flipped to the last entry, the one I hadn't been able to fully decipher before due to the bloodstains. Now, under the harsh fluorescent light, the words were terrifyingly clear. "The vial is the key. The choir within sings of release. Open it, and all the lost voices will be free. Open it, and Blackwood will breathe again through us all." She knows. The Night Warden knows the litany. The Night Warden. Miss Thorne. The litany heart. With a surge of revulsion, I took the vial to the compounding room, and following Miss Thorne's explicit instructions, placed it inside the small, ancient lead-lined safe, slamming the heavy door shut, and spinning the combination lock. But even through the thick metal, I could feel its presence. A cold spot in the room, and the scent, that unholy trinity of jasmine, sulfur, and blood, seemed to cling to my clothes, to my skin, a promise of madness yet to be unleashed. That night, my dreams were filled with eyeless faces, whispering my name, and the sound of 1,000 tiny, unseen things, scratching, trying to get out of the walls, out of the floor, out of the very air around me. And the vial sat in the safe, pulsing faintly in the dark, waiting. The following nights were a descent into a waking nightmare. The echoes of Blackwood Asylum were no longer fleeting glimpses or subtle whispers. They were a constant, oppressive presence. Gaunt figures in tattered gowns drifted through the aisles, their movements soundless, their faces either obscured by shadow or horrifically distinct, eyes milky white and unseeing, or hollow sockets from which a thin, dark ichor seemed to weep. Their spectral hands, little more than bone and desiccated skin, would reach out as I passed, their touch an icy burn that lingered long after they'd faded back into the gloom. The whispers were incessant, a chorus of tormented voices sighing, sobbing, begging for release, or for a draft of some forgotten medicine. My name, Julian, was a constant refrain, sometimes a plea, sometimes a hissed accusation. The scent from the lead-lined safe, where the ancient vial lay sequestered, had somehow permeated the entire pharmacy. It was a suffocating miasma of funereal jasmine, acrid sulfur, and the coppery tang of old blood, a perfume of madness that clung to everything, inducing waves of nausea and vivid, terrifying hallucinations. I saw the walls of the compounding room drip with a substance like tar. The faces in old medical portraits on the wall twist into leering grimaces, my own reflection in the polished counter, sometimes showing a stranger with haunted, hollow eyes. My carefully constructed scientific worldview was crumbling, replaced by a primal, superstitious terror. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford, each attempt resulting in jolting awake, heart pounding, to the sound of scratching from within the walls, or the soft, dragging footsteps of unseen patients. It was on such a night, when the wind howled around Willow Creek like a banshee, and the veil between worlds felt terrifyingly thin, that Miss Lydia Thorne appeared, not at her usual hour of arrival to relieve me, but materializing from the shadows of the dispensary near 3 in the morning, as if she had been there all along, watching. Her usual severe composure was gone, replaced by an unnerving, almost ecstatic calm. Her gray eyes, usually so cold, now held a fervent, almost predatory gleam. "They are restless tonight, aren't they, Dr. Frost?" she said, her voice a silken murmur that barely disturbed the charged air. They sensed the proximity of a kindred spirit, someone who understands the delicate balance between remedy and affliction. "And Thorne," I stammered, backing away, my hand instinctively reaching for the heavy pestle I now kept close. "What is happening here? These things..." She tutted, a surprisingly maternal sound that was utterly incongruous with the madness in her eyes. "They are merely echoes, Doctor. Echoes of suffering, of misguided treatments, of minds fractured beyond repair." Blackwood Creek was a crucible of such echoes. And this place, she gestured around the pharmacy, this pharmacy, built upon older foundations, has always been a conduit. She moved closer, her steps unnervingly silent. "My family, the Thorns, we have been the keepers of this conduit for generations. Not to seal it, as some might assume, but to manage it, to regulate the flow. The vial you found, Dr. Frost," her gaze flickered towards the compounding room, "is the key. An ancient preparation, a psychotropic catalyst, if you will, crafted by an ancestor with a unique understanding of the etheric arts. It doesn't just soothe the echoes. It can amplify them, direct them, even perhaps give them a new focus." My blood ran cold. The diary entry. She knows. The Night Warden knows the litany. "You want me to open it?" I whispered, the horrifying realization dawning. "You want me to become like them, or a vessel for them? A vessel, perhaps, or a new warden?" Ms. Thorne mused, her lips curving into a serene, terrifying smile. "The old ways require a periodic renewal. A fresh mind, untainted by prolonged exposure, yet sufficiently attuned to the dissonance. Your past, Dr. Frost, your unfortunate mistake, the guilt you carry, it makes you exquisitely sensitive. The perfect instrument for the litany of containment. Or, perhaps," her smile widened, "the litany of release." As if summoned by her words, the activity of the echoes intensified. The temperature in the pharmacy plummeted, the shadowy figures solidified, their forms more distinct, their moans and whispers coalescing into a single desperate plea. Drifted towards me, her hands outstretched, her fingernails long and yellowed. The tincture. Please. The pain. They see your potential, Dr. Frost. Miss Thorne said, her voice almost a purr. They see the healer within. Open the vial. Embrace the chorus. Become part of Perdition's true heritage. She produced a small antique key, clearly for the lead-lined safe. Suddenly, a distorted, high-pitched shriek cut through the spectral cacophony. A new figure stumbled into the pharmacy from the front entrance, which I now realized was slightly ajar. It was a man, or what had once been a man. His clothes were the tattered remnants of a patient's gown, his skin a sickly gray, stretched taut over sharp bones. One eye was a milky orb, the other a gaping, weeping socket. He clutched a crudely written prescription slip. Jane Doe, Blackwood Creek Asylum, an impossibly large dose of Thorazine. He lunged towards the counter, his movements jerky and unnatural. There, the quietus, he gurgled, his voice a wet, rasping sound. She promised. If we brought the new one, he pointed a trembling skeletal finger at me. This was no mere echo. This was something else. Something given a horrifying semblance of physicality. An emissary, Miss Thorne said calmly, unfazed. A demonstration of what awaits. Of the peace you can bring them, Dr. Frost. Or the power you can wield. The cacophony reached a fever pitch. The walls seemed to press in. The air thick with the scent of decay and madness. I was trapped between a deranged custodian of ancient horrors, a horde of spectral entities, and a grotesque mockery of a patient. Then a shout from outside, followed by the shattering of the front window. Deputy Ray Keller burst in, not with his usual weary demeanor, but with a grim, determined set to his jaw, a heavy-gauge shotgun in his hands. Chloe Davis was right behind him, her face pale but resolute, clutching a thick, leather-bound ledger I recognized as one of the pharmacy's oldest prescription logs. Thorne! Keller roared, his voice cutting through the din. It ends tonight! No more keepers. No more offerings. Deputy Keller, Miss Thorne said, her voice laced with icy disapproval. You meddle in affairs far beyond your comprehension. This is the ancient Pact of Perdition. Pact's broken, Lydia, Chloe interjected, her voice surprisingly strong. We found your ancestors' journals. The litany of containment isn't about controlling them. It's about feeding whatever is in that vial, using the echoes as fuel. Using the echoes as fuel. Miss Thorne's serene mask finally cracked, her face contorting into a snarl of fury. Insolent children, you know nothing. She lunged towards the compounding room, towards the safe. The grotesque patient shrieked and charged at Keller. The spectral figures surged forward, their whispers becoming a deafening roar. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that if Miss Thorne reached that vial, if she opened it, whatever fragile barrier remained would shatter. My scientific mind, my pharmacist training, desperately searched for a solution, a counteragent to this supernatural poison. The vial's unique aroma: jasmine, sulfur, blood. Sulfur compounds were often used in older remedies as neutralizers or irritants. Chloe, the elemental sulfur powder, I yelled, pointing towards a large jar on a high shelf in the compounding room, a rarely used ingredient for certain dermatological preparations, and a wide dispersal mechanism. An insufflator anything, while Keller grappled with the physical horror, and Miss Thorne fumbled with the safe's combination. Chloe, with a burst of adrenaline, scrambled onto a stool, reaching the sulfur. The spectral forms were closing in on me, their icy touch burning my skin, their faces inches from mine, whispering promises of oblivion and eternal torment. I had to create a diversion, something to disrupt their focus, their connection to whatever force Miss Thorne was trying to unleash. My eyes fell on the shredder, and the pile of John Doe prescriptions I had dutifully destroyed. They want acknowledgement, the old diary had said. With a desperate cry, I grabbed a handful of my own prescription pads and a pen, scribbling furiously. John Doe, Blackwood Asylum, diagnosis, released, prescription, peace. I shredded them one after another, shouting the words. The effect was instantaneous. The echoes recoiled, a wave of confusion rippling through their ranks. Their tormented cries shifted, a new note of hope, or perhaps just startled silence, entering the din. It was the opening Chloe needed. She'd found an old rubber bulb insufflator. She filled it with the bright yellow sulfur powder. Miss Thorne finally wrenched open the safe, her hand reaching for the dark amber vial. Too late, fools, she shrieked. Now, Chloe, now! I screamed. Chloe squeezed the bulb, sending a dense cloud of fine sulfur powder into the air, directly towards Miss Thorne and the open safe. Miss Thorne choked, a strangled cry, as the yellow dust enveloped her and the vial. The spectral figures shrieked, a sound of intense agony, and began to dissipate, their forms flickering and becoming translucent, as if the sulfur was anathema to their very existence. The grotesque patient collapsed, twitching, its form seeming to deflate. The vial, clutched in Miss Thorne's sulfur-coated hand, began to glow with an angry, pulsating red light. A high-pitched whine emanated from it, growing in intensity, a sound that felt like needles in my brain. The pharmacy shook violently. It's going to break, Keller yelled, struggling to his feet. Miss Thorne, her eyes wide with terror and a dawning realization of her miscalculation, looked at the glowing vial in her hand, as if it were a viper. The litany of release was not what she had envisioned. The red light from the vial flared, blindingly bright, and then, with a sound like shattering crystal and a concussive blast of frigid air that threw us all backwards, it went dark. The silence that descended after the vial's explosive demise was more profound, more absolute than any Perdition night I had yet endured. It was the silence of a vacuum, the silence of a battle abruptly ended, leaving only the ringing in our ears and the acrid stench of sulfur hanging heavy in the air. The violent shaking had stopped. The oppressive, bone-chilling cold had receded, replaced by the natural coolness of the pre-dawn hour. Dust motes, thick with sulfur particles, danced in the weak beam of Deputy Keller's flashlight as he slowly got to his feet. Coughing, Chloe was already scrambling up, her face smudged with yellow, her eyes wide but remarkably steady. I pushed myself up from the floor, my body aching, my mind a maelstrom of disbelief and adrenaline. The echoes of Blackwood Asylum were gone. The oppressive, sentient atmosphere that had plagued Willow Creek Pharmacy had lifted, as if a great weight had been removed. The grotesque emissary lay in a heap near the counter, no longer twitching, its form rapidly desiccating, crumbling into a pile of what looked like old, tattered cloth and brittle, dust-like fragments. Miss Lydia Thorne lay near the open safe, unmoving. Keller approached her cautiously. She was alive, her breathing shallow, her eyes closed. The dark amber vial was gone, seemingly vaporized in the final explosive release of its contained energy. Her hand, which had clutched it, was raw and blistered, the skin angry red beneath the coating of sulfur. The serene, manipulative mask was gone, leaving only the face of a frail, defeated old woman. What was in that thing? Chloe whispered, her voice hoarse, gesturing towards the safe. I don't know for sure, I said, my own voice rough. But I think your ancestors' journal was right, Chloe. It wasn't just controlling the echoes. It was feeding on them, or being fed by them. A symbiotic malignancy. The sulfur, a classic alchemical element often associated with purification or warding, had clearly been anathema to it, disrupting its ethereal structure. My desperate gamble with the release prescriptions had momentarily confused the echoes, breaking their focused intent, giving Chloe the opening she needed. Keller grunted, cuffing Miss Thorne's uninjured hand to a sturdy shelf support. She'll have a lot of explaining to do, though I doubt any of it will make sense to the folks down in Cheyenne. He looked around the wrecked pharmacy. This whole town's got layers of rot no one wants to look at too closely. He paused, his gaze meeting mine. That's sulfur. Quick thinking, Doc. And you, young lady, he nodded at Chloe. You've got more grit than most deputies I know. As the first hesitant light of dawn began to filter through the shattered front window, painting the sulfur-dusted chaos in pale, ghostly hues, the immediate sense of supernatural dread began to recede, replaced by the more mundane realities of what had transpired. A break-in, an assault, an old woman who had clearly lost her mind. That would be the official story, meticulously constructed. The truth, far more monstrous and unbelievable, would remain buried beneath the floorboards of Willow Creek, alongside generations of other unspoken secrets. We found the ancient, lead-lined safe empty, save for a lingering coldness and the faintest trace of that unholy jasmine sulfur blood perfume, now more a memory than a scent. Miss Thorne's ancestors' journals, which Chloe had bravely retrieved, spoke of the anima sanguis, the blood soul, a potent concoction designed to bind and amplify wayward spirits, but which, over time, had developed a malevolent sentience of its own, requiring ever more potent wardens or vessels to appease its hunger. The Thorns had gone from being its creators to its prisoners, perpetuating a cycle of horror in the name of a twisted containment. When the county sheriff and the first responders arrived, summoned by Keller, their faces were a mixture of confusion and grim resignation. Perdition, it seemed, had a reputation for nights like these, even if the true nature of its darkness was rarely acknowledged. Miss Thorne was taken away on a stretcher, her eyes still closed, her silence absolute. No one questioned the sulfur too closely. A chemical spill in a pharmacy wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility. Chloe and I gave our statements, carefully edited versions of the night's events. We were victims of a disturbed individual. The end. But the unspoken truth hung heavy between us, a shared trauma that would bind us in ways we couldn't yet comprehend. As I watched the emergency vehicles pull away, the rising sun casting long shadows, I felt a profound exhaustion, but also a sliver of something else, a fragile, tentative peace. The whispers, for now, were silent. Months later, Perdition, Wyoming, was a fading, nightmarish memory. Willow Creek Pharmacy had been closed indefinitely, its windows boarded up, another forgotten casualty in a town that seemed to specialize in them. Miss Lydia Thorne, I learned through a discreet inquiry to Deputy Keller, had been declared mentally unfit to stand trial, and was now a permanent resident of a state psychiatric facility, ironically, not too dissimilar in its grim reputation to the Blackwood Creek Asylum she had, in her own twisted way, tried to manage. Her ramblings about ancient pacts, whispering vials, and the hunger of the echoes were dismissed as the delusions of a fractured mind. I'd left Perdition as soon as I was able, unable to bear the weight of its silence, its knowing glances. I found a position in a busy, brightly lit, 24-hour pharmacy in a sprawling urban center on the West Coast, a place as far removed from the shadowed antiquity of Willow Creek as I could imagine. I craved the noise, the anonymity, the relentless, unthinking thrum of ordinary life. For a while it worked. The faces in my nightmares began to recede, replaced by the mundane anxieties of a demanding job. Chloe Davis, I heard, had finished her internship, and surprisingly, decided to stay in Perdition. She'd taken a job at the small county clinic, her determination to understand and perhaps combat the town's lingering darkness, however subtly, outweighing her fear. We corresponded occasionally, brief, carefully worded emails that skirted the true horror of what we experienced, but acknowledged a shared scar. One late Tuesday night, during a lull in the usual city bustle, an electronic prescription pinged into my queue. I opened it, my eyes scanning the details. Patient name, Annabelle Thorne. Address, Perdition County Secure Ward. Medication, chlorpromazine, high dosage. Prescriber, State Psychiatric Services. My blood ran cold. Annabelle Thorne. Miss Thorne's first name, if I recalled correctly. A chilling coincidence, or something more? As I prepared the medication, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The familiar cloying scent of jasmine and sulfur, faint but unmistakable, pricked at my nostrils. I looked around the brightly lit modern dispensary. For a fleeting second, in the reflection of the polished steel counter, I saw not my own face, but the gaunt, haunted features of a Blackwood patient, their eyes hollow and pleading. The whispers started again, soft, insidious, at the very edge of my hearing. So many, still waiting. I stumbled back, knocking a tray of vials to the floor. My colleague on duty rushed over, concern etched on her face. "Julian, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, my heart hammering. "Just tired. Long shift." But I knew. The vial may have been destroyed, but its essence, its anima sanguis, was not so easily vanquished. It was a contagion of the soul, a sickness that spread through cracks in the mind, through shared trauma, through the very act of remembrance. Perdition wasn't just a place. It was a state of being, a lingering infection. I filled Annabelle Thorne's prescription. As I affixed the label, I noticed a small, almost invisible detail on the digital order form. Something I'd overlooked in my initial shock. A secondary, non-standard diagnostic code I didn't recognize. When I ran it through an old, obscure medical database I sometimes used for historical research, the definition that came back was archaic, almost medieval. Morbus susurrens, the whispering sickness. The fight at Willow Creek hadn't been an ending. It had been an exposure. I was now a carrier, perhaps, or simply attuned to a frequency of despair that most of the world remained blissfully deaf to. The echoes weren't confined to Blackwood. They were everywhere, in every shadowed corner, in every troubled mind. And sometimes, when the night was quiet and the barriers thin, they would reach out, seeking not a cure, but a listener, seeking a new prescription for their damnation. I still work the night shift. It's where I belong now, a warden of a different kind, in a much larger, more diffuse asylum. And sometimes, when a particular prescription comes through, or when a certain cloying floral scent drifts on the sterile air, I prepare an extra unwritten order, a silent prayer for the lost, and a renewed vow to keep listening, even when the whispers try to pull me back into the all-consuming silence of perdition. The litany, it seemed, was now mine to bear, and that was I'm a night shift pharmacist in Perdition. We have 3 strange rules to survive. Now tell me, if you had found that unmarked vial, would you have opened it? Would you have obeyed the rules? Or tested them? Leave your answer in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story chilled you even half as much as it did me while narrating it, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. There's more coming. The veil is always thin at night, and the next rule you hear might be one you're already breaking. Sleep well, if you can.